She was the smartest girl in school, until one kiss from her teacher destroyed everything. They expelled her. Her mother almost collapsed from shame. But years later, when that same teacher came crawling into her clinic, sick, broke, and begging for help, she didn't slam the door in his face. She smiled and reached for her stethoscope. This is not just a story. It's a journey of betrayal, survival, and the sweetest kind of revenge, success. Welcome to our channel, Story Lovers. We love having you here. Before we continue with this intriguing story, please subscribe and turn on notification bell so you can get notified whenever we drop new stories. Now enjoy. Anita Iwachukwu walked to school every morning with a bag that had one broken strap and shoes that had lost their shine. Her uniform, though clean, was faded, and the hem was starting to loosen at the edges. Still, her steps were steady, her eyes focused. She always held her books close, like they were her shield against the world. She lived with her mother and two younger brothers in a one-room house at the edge of the town. Her mother sold vegetables in the market, bitter leaf, ugu, and sometimes garden eggs when the season was good. Her father had left when she was just a baby. Nobody told her why. They simply said, "He went to Lagos and never came back." Anita had stopped asking. From a young age, she learned that silence could be heavy, and that you sometimes needed to carry your dreams alone. She carried hers like a fire in her chest. She wanted to become a doctor, not for money, not even for fame. She just wanted to fix people, especially her mother, who coughed too much at night, but always smiled in the morning. When the scholarship letter came from Riverdale High, her mother cried. Not loud tears, but the quiet ones that came with deep gratitude. Riverdale was the kind of school only politicians' children attended. The kind of school that had a music room, a science lab with real chemicals, and a gate with two uniformed security men. At Riverdale, Anita stood out immediately, not because she wanted to, but because poverty doesn't hide well. The other students had cars and smartphones. Anita had her mind. She spoke softly, avoided trouble, and stayed away from gossip. The teachers liked her. She answered questions no one else could. Her notes were always neat. She never came late. Most of the other girls in her class talked about boys and hairstyles. Anita talked about bones, blood, and diseases. That's what she read about in the old medical books she borrowed from the town library. Boys didn't distract her. Neither did makeup or parties. She simply wasn't interested. That was before Mr. Emmanuel came. He arrived in the second term of SS1, tall and confident, with a voice that sounded like music when he spoke. The girls giggled any time he entered the classroom. Some even fixed their hair and sat up straighter when he walked past. He was young, only 28, with smooth skin and a kind of smile that made people stop and look again. Anita didn't care. To her, he was just another teacher. She greeted him politely, like she did with all the staff, and returned to her notes. But Mr. Emmanuel noticed her. The quiet girl with bright eyes who always sat by the window. The one who didn't try to get his attention, but always solved the hardest problems on the board. Something about her made him curious. He began to watch her more closely. And slowly, he began to find ways to talk to her. Anita was used to being noticed for her brain, not her presence. So when Mr. Emmanuel began calling on her more during lessons, she didn't think much of it at first. "Correct as always, Anita," he'd say, smiling as he underlined her answer on the board. The class would groan, and some girls would roll their eyes, whispering things behind cupped palms. Anita tried not to mind. He started giving her extra problems to solve. One day, he said would help prepare her for the state maths competition. She was excited at first. It felt good to be challenged. After school, he'd ask her to stay behind for just a few minutes to go over solutions. At first, they sat in the classroom with other students walking in and out. Then, slowly, the meetings moved to quieter places. The staff room, an empty lab, and sometimes under the big mango tree near the school fence. He spoke to her in ways no adult ever had. He asked about her dreams, her family, what she liked to read. He told her about his own journey, how he had to fight hard to become a teacher. "You remind me of myself," he said one evening, smiling gently. "You're special, Anita, and I see you, even if others don't." No one had ever said that to her. When he handed her a small phone one Friday afternoon, she hesitated. It wasn't flashy, just an old Nokia with buttons, but it felt heavy in her palm. "So you can reach me if you get stuck on a question," he said, his voice soft. She kept it hidden from her mother. They began texting every evening. At first, it was just numbers and equations. Then it became jokes, questions about her day, dreams about the future. Sometimes, he'd send her a sweet message at midnight. "Don't let the world change your light. Sleep well, Stargirl." Anita started waiting for those messages. One day, after school, he asked if she wanted to take a walk. They walked down a quiet path near the market. He bought her ice cream. They talked about books and life and how unfair the world could be. When they got back to the school compound, he touched her hand, gently, as if asking for permission, and then kissed her. It was quick, soft, and confusing. Anita didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry," he said. "I shouldn't have. I think I love you." She said nothing, but her heart beat faster than it ever had. She didn't know what love was supposed to feel like, but this felt warm, and it didn't hurt. After that, their moments became less innocent. He'd call her out of class sometimes to talk, and no one questioned it. She started visiting his rented apartment on weekends, always telling her mother it was for extra lessons, lying to herself that it was okay, that he loved her, that love didn't always follow rules. But everything else in her life started falling apart. Her test scores dropped. Teachers called her out in class. "You used to be our brightest. What happened, Anita?" they asked, puzzled. She didn't answer. She avoided her friends. Her uniform grew tighter, and she started feeling sick in the mornings. By second term, the truth hit her fully. She was pregnant. She cried alone in the school toilet, clutching the result from the clinic. She told Mr. Emanuel the next day. He didn't yell. He didn't cry. He just went quiet. "You have to be strong," he said finally, standing up and pacing the room. "We'll find a way." But that was the last time they had a real conversation. He stopped replying her texts. Then, he stopped picking her calls. She asked around, but no one gave her answers. A week later, the principal announced during assembly that Mr. Emanuel had resigned and relocated. Just like that, he was gone. But that was not the end of the shock. On a Monday morning assembly, under the hot sun and in front of the whole school, Anita felt her vision blur. The principal's voice was just a buzz in her ears. Her legs wobbled. She tried to hold on to a friend beside her, but her knees buckled. She fainted. A teacher rushed to her. There was confusion, shouts. Students stepped back. When she woke up, the ceiling above her looked unfamiliar. She heard murmuring voices, then recognized the school nurse's face. The counselor sat beside her, hands folded tightly in her lap, lips pressed into a straight line. Then came the nurse's voice, soft, cautious, almost afraid. "Anita, we ran a quick test. You're pregnant." Time paused. Anita said nothing. There was nothing to say. She turned her face away and let the ceiling blur again. Her mother arrived 2 hours later. Her footsteps thundered down the corridor like a funeral drum. When she entered the room and saw Anita sitting quietly on the clinic bed, her eyes locked on her daughter's. Then her voice rose, not in anger, but in something far deeper and sadder. "You want to kill me, Anita?" She didn't cry immediately. She just stood there, head shaking slowly, eyes blinking fast, as though trying to stop the tears before they drowned her. By evening, it was done. The scholarship was withdrawn. The school board had met. Rules were rules, and pregnant students could not continue. Anita was expelled. By the next day, the story had spread. It moved faster than rain in Harmattan. Girls whispered in their classrooms. Boys laughed behind trees. Neighbors stared as Anita walked down the street with her mother. Some hissed. Some just muttered, "Now wow, that quiet girl." She stopped going outside. She stayed indoors, sitting in the corner of the room, waiting. For what, she didn't know. Mr. Emmanuel never called, never sent a message. Nothing. It was as if he had erased her, and everything they shared, like a wrong answer wiped off a board. When the baby came, the labor was long. Her mother stayed beside her, holding her hand tightly, not saying much. Just once, when the baby finally cried, she said quietly, "God, please help her not to waste again." Anita named the boy Daniel. And then the days became routine, feeding, changing, rocking. Watching through the curtain as girls her age passed by in the same uniforms she once wore with pride. She didn't cry often. She didn't speak much either. She became a shadow of the girl who once topped the whole school. Until the day her little brother, Chuka, was brought home in bloodied shorts, groaning in pain. He had been hit by a motorcycle on his way from an errand. Anita screamed. They ran to the nearest government hospital. The nurses asked for a deposit. Her mother didn't have it. Anita begged. They shook their heads. "Sorry, no deposit, no bed." She stood outside the gate, barefoot, crying, unsure of who to call, unsure if her brother was dying. Then a car pulled up. A woman stepped out, short, round-faced, with tired eyes that suddenly widened when she saw Anita. "Is that you? Anita, the girl that used to teach my son maths?" What happened? Anita could barely talk through the tears. "It's my brother. They won't treat him." The woman didn't ask further. She walked straight into the hospital, paid the bill, and demanded that the boy be attended to. Afterwards, as they sat in the waiting room, the woman touched Anita's shoulder gently. "You're still brilliant. I know it. My son still talks about you. I run a private clinic down the road. Come work with us as a cleaner. It's not much, but it's something." Anita looked at her, stunned. The woman smiled. "You helped us before. Let us help you now." The floor of the clinic was always cold in the mornings, and Anita had grown used to the scent of antiseptic and baby powder lingering in the air. Those early days, when she cleaned with a baby tied to her back and her eyes red from sleepless nights, shaped her. She learned the rhythms of struggle, the way it moved like a silent drumbeat in the background of life. By night, she studied with worn-out textbooks borrowed from a retired teacher who once believed in her. By day, she scrubbed toilets, sterilized instruments, and occasionally helped count pills. She fed Daniel from her breast between breaks, humming softly while he dozed beside her on the staff bench. It wasn't glamorous, but it was motion, forward. Mrs. Etam noticed her quiet brilliance, the way Anita watched doctors work, the way she asked questions, the way she corrected a nurse once with a soft, almost embarrassed voice that turned out to be completely right. One Thursday afternoon, Mrs. Etam called her into the small office behind the pharmacy. "I've paid for your WAYAC and JAM forms," she said, sliding the receipts across the table. "You're not meant to be mopping floors forever." Anita stared at her, speechless. Her mouth moved, but the words didn't come. Instead, her hands gripped the edges of the receipt like it was gold. She passed the exams, got into the University of Ibadan. Her first day on campus, she held Daniel's tiny hand tightly, scared to let go, scared of letting the past catch up with her. But Daniel was smiling, always smiling, like her pain wasn't his to carry. The years sped by. She juggled lectures, odd jobs, and parenting. Some days she cried, some days she wanted to quit, but most days she stood, somehow. She graduated among the best in her class. The dean shook her hand with pride and whispered, "Your story is the kind people write books about." Then came a letter, an international scholarship from the Ministry of Health. Her name had been nominated. Her work ethic, her results, her story, all had spoken for her. She flew out for residency, left Nigeria for the first time, saw snow, slept in rooms with central heating, wore a name tag that read Doctor Anita Iwu Chukwu. Years passed. Daniel grew taller, called her Mum with that teenage stretch in his voice, asked questions about life, told her he wanted to build a tech company. She smiled. They had dreams again. When she returned to Nigeria, she didn't head for the fancy hospitals in Lagos or Abuja. She returned to her roots, the place where it all began. The same town where her sandals once cracked on the hot, tarred road, where neighbors once whispered. She opened a clinic for girls like her, young, confused, brilliant, and broken by bad decisions or wicked men. She called it the Second Chance Center. It became a haven, clean, bright, filled with nurses who knew how to speak softly and doctors who didn't judge. One rainy afternoon, with thunder pacing across the sky like a tired god, the receptionist knocked softly on her door. "Doctor, there's a man here. Says he needs urgent attention. Chest pain. He looks rough." Anita nodded and reached for her stethoscope. She stepped into the consulting room and stopped. The man on the plastic chair looked smaller than she remembered. His shirt was threadbare, his trousers torn at the hem. His face, once proud and charming, was sunken, pale. He was breathing hard. Wet patches clung to his underarms. He looked up and froze. Their eyes locked. He blinked, then whispered, "Anita?" She didn't speak. She just stood there, letting the rain outside say all the things she didn't need to anymore. She stood at the edge of the room, the sound of rain tapping against the window, her hand still resting on the doorframe. The years had aged him, not in the graceful way of men who had lived well, but in the scattered, worn-out way of someone who had made too many wrong turns and now lived in the ruins of them. Mr. Emmanuel didn't recognize Anita at first. The woman before him was too different from the frightened, broken girl he had once left behind. Her eyes had hardened with time, no longer filled with the naive hope he remembered. She was now a doctor, standing tall, confident, her hands steady as they healed others. He had aged poorly. His hair had grayed, his face lined with the kind of regret that only years of poor decisions could carve. His body sagged from years of neglect, and his eyes, once so charming, now seemed sunken, lost in a sea of remorse. Anita watched him closely as he spoke about his life. He had moved to a small, run-down private school, teaching children who never seemed to care. He lived in a crumbling one-room apartment, the air thick with loneliness. The woman he had left her for had recently dumped him, a cruel twist of fate, considering he had traded everything for her, only to lose it all in the end. But Anita remained silent as he poured out his regrets, her face unreadable. She had heard it all before in her mind. The excuses, the sorrow, the self-loathing. She had long stopped searching for answers from him. Mr. Emmanuel coughed and looked away. "I didn't know where else to go," he mumbled, voice hoarse. She walked in slowly, checking the file the nurse had dropped on the table. "Chest pain, dizziness," she read aloud, her tone calm, controlled. He looked at her again, his eyes unsure, almost pleading. You're a doctor now." She nodded once, clipped her stethoscope around her neck, and gestured toward the examination table. "Lie down." As she examined him, her hands were steady, clinical. She checked his pulse, asked routine questions. His breathing was irregular. His blood pressure was alarmingly high. Years of untreated stress, probably. Poor diet. No routine checkups. When she was done, she wrote down a few prescriptions and slid the paper across the table. "You'll need tests. I can run a few here, but you should prepare to go to the teaching hospital. You might be dealing with something serious. He nodded, staring at the paper like he couldn't read it. I'm sorry, he said suddenly, voice cracking. I was a coward. I ruined everything. I didn't know how to face it, how to face you. Anita looked at him for a long time. Her face softened, not with pity, but something deeper, understanding. You didn't just ruin something, she said quietly. You left a child behind, a child who asked about his father for years. You left me to face shame, hunger, and doors slammed in my face. But I'm not here to curse you. He blinked back tears. I deserve it, though, she sighed, standing upright. Maybe, but forgiveness isn't about what you deserve. It's about what I'm willing to give so I can breathe without bitterness. He sat silently, tears wetting the collar of his faded shirt. I have a son, she said. His name is Daniel. He's smart, kind. He doesn't know you. I never told him anything bad about you, but I never had anything good to say either. Anita watched as the realization dawned in his eyes. His face crumpled, and before she could stop him, he sank to his knees. Anita, I am so sorry, he said, his voice breaking. I didn't know. I didn't know what I was doing. I was selfish. I ruined everything. Anita stood there for a moment, her gaze softening but firm. I forgave you a long time ago, she replied, her voice steady. Not for you, for me, and for my son. Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of years of pain and healing. He's the reason I became a doctor, she added, her eyes briefly glancing down at the nameplate on her desk. To give him a life better than the one I had. He nodded slowly. Can I meet him? I don't know yet, she replied. Let's start with the tests. Before Mr. Emmanuel could say anything more, the door to the clinic opened and her husband walked in. He was tall, calm, and gentle. He kissed Anita on the cheek, his hand lingering on her shoulder for a brief moment of warmth. Babe, he said softly, your next patient is here. Anita smiled at him, her eyes bright with the love and peace she had found in this new chapter of her life. Mr. Emmanuel watched silently, not a hint of bitterness in her eyes, just an overwhelming sense of peace. With a slight nod, Anita turned her attention back to her husband, her world whole again, her family the anchor she had always needed. Mr. Emmanuel, still standing in the doorway, watched as Anita laughed softly with her husband by her side, her stethoscope bouncing slightly as she moved. There was no more sorrow in her, no more anger, just a life lived fully, a family she had built from the wreckage of her past. As he stepped out of the clinic, holding his prescription in one hand, he turned back one last time. There she was, the woman who had once loved him. But more than that, the woman who had forgiven him and rebuilt herself. He turned away, walking down the street in the rain, but there was no bitterness left, no jealousy, just quiet, painful respect. There are wounds time can't erase. But sometimes, the most powerful revenge is healing. Thank you for watching Story Lovers. Please like, subscribe, and turn on notification bell so you can get notified whenever we drop new stories.